Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Hey everybody, it's Tess. I'm here with my beautiful and talented co-host, Karen. How's it going?
It's going well. We actually taped 3 different interviews this week. It's kind of a record for us.
Yes, it was a lot, and it was a lot of fun too. I just get such a kick out of learning about the processes and their journeys. It's really fun.
Well, and the reason we had to do 3, should I tell them? It's because Tess Thompson is a traveling fool. You went on a getaway with your daughters, and then you went, I don't know where.
Yeah,
I know.
You
and I are both going to a conference in next month.
Yeah, in Florida. No, it's been crazy. As a matter of fact, so we've got Vegas next week because my husband won a pool tournament and they're playing in Vegas, which is really fun and cool. And I was like, well, I'm going to. And then 3 days after we get back, I take Ella out to Michigan for college. And then I'm back a couple weeks, and then we go to NINC, which is our conference in Tampa.
So you were stuck in your house for a year, and now you're making up for lost time.
Exactly. And I'm such a workaholic and so neurotic. I was like, oh my gosh, these trips, that could be a whole novella. You know, I could write a whole novel in that amount of time. And then I'm like, no, this is good. It's good to get out, see things, meet new people. It's all good.
Interact with human beings.
Yeah, interact with somebody other than Mittens.
Well, and one of the things a lot of the authors that we've interviewed have talked about is filling the creative well, that you have to have a life outside of your laptop and the printed page. So I think this is good.
Yeah, I agree. I'm super excited to see you, and you're bringing Greg and I'm bringing Cliff, and I'm secretly hoping that they become best friends. And then we all agree to, travel together to some exotic place.
I didn't know you were bringing Cliff, actually.
Yeah. Yes, I am. And I think we'll be there about the same time you guys are. So I'm hoping we can all have dinner. But anyway, let's not bore our poor listeners with all of that. We had Edwin Hill on today, and he is amazing. I also want to be his best friend, but he lives too far away, I think. And, he hangs out with some other really cool people, one of whom we're going to have on the podcast.
It was fun talking to Edwin and hearing about his dog and faithful writing partner, Edith Ann.
It was also fun to learn something that you two have in common, which we'll let the listener discover what that is. Anyway, enough about us. Enjoy the interview with Edwin Hill. On with the show. Welcome to Behind the Book. Today we have Edwin Hill with us. Super excited. He's the Edgar and Agatha-award nominated author of the Hester Thursday mystery series, Little Comfort, The Missing Ones, and Watcher, and the upcoming standalone novel, The Secrets We Share. He was born in Duxbury, Massachusetts, and spent most of his childhood obsessing over the famous 5, Agatha Christie, and somehow finding a way into C.S. Lewis's wardrobe. One of his best memories is of finishing a copy of The Seven Dials Mystery while the rest of the family visited Mount Rushmore. After attending Wesleyan University and graduating with a BA in American Studies, he headed west to San Francisco for the dot-com boom. Later, he returned to Boston, earned an MFA from Emerson College, and switched gears to work in educational publishing. He served as the vice president and editorial director for Bedford St. Martin's, a division of Macmillan Learning, for many years before turning to writing full-time. Tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you become a novelist, and which of your titles was your first published book?
Well, my first published book was Little Comfort, which is the first in a trilogy about Hester Thursday. My writing journey, like a lot of authors, was a long one. It was there were a lot of fits and starts along the way. I went to, as you mentioned in my bio, I went to Emerson College around the year 2000 and got my MFA. And I wrote a novel as part of the process of getting that MFA. and I graduated from college. I got an agent for that novel, and we shopped it around New York, and it didn't sell. And then I stopped writing for a while. And, I sometimes I beat myself up about that, but I actually have a much healthier view on it now. I really spent some time focusing in on my career in publishing, on making some money for a while, which is actually an important thing to do in life. And I had some success while I was in the publishing world that afforded me the ability to leave and become a full-time writer. So after that first novel didn't sell, it took me about 13 years to finally write another novel. So that would have been Little Comfort. And I sold that in 2016, and I've published a book every year since then.
How was that going from the corporate world of Macmillan Learning to the more creative side? Was that a difficult transition?
No, not really, because I worked on the creative aspect of my life for a very long time. So I was sort of used to being creative. And part of being, I think this is true of all writers, to be successful as a writer, you have to have discipline. You have to sit down in your seat every day, and you actually have to do the work. And so I did that while I was still working in the corporate world. I made sure I got up every day at about 5 a.m. I worked for about 2 hours on my writing. And then I would go into my day job every day. So when I left the corporate world, I think I brought a lot of my values from the corporate world. I have a good attitude about showing up for work every day, and I make sure that I show up for myself every day now.
I have to admit, I have a thing about names, and I love that the main character of your mystery series is named Hester Thursby. She's a Harvard librarian who has a side business locating lost people. How did you decide on a librarian as a protagonist, and how did you pick her name?
Oh, goodness. Well, as anyone who has written a first novel knows, you often sit with that first novel for a very long time. And so I sat with my first novel for a long time. And when I first started writing it, Hester wasn't even a character in it. She didn't exist. That novel is about Hester, and then there are two antagonists in that novel. They're named Sam and Gabe. And when I first came up with the concept for that novel, they were going to be the main characters. I sort of wanted it to be an anti-hero type story. And I worked on it for a while. I mean, again, I worked on it for a long time, and no one was waiting for it. I could spend as much time with it as I wanted to. I worked on it for a while, and eventually I thought, this isn't working, and I need to bring in a regular old protagonist, like a protagonist that can sort of drive the story. And I hate to tell you, this was my whole thought process around poor Hester Thursby. I already had a story with two guys as the antagonist, and I was like, I don't want to write a book about three guys, so I'll make the protagonist be a woman. That was the whole thought process. And so I brought in this woman, and I sort of started filling in the details about her. And in writing, you do this thing which is called a what if exercise. You just say, what if X, what if Y? And so for her profession, she's a librarian, I went through the what if exercise. So for a while, she was going to be something very light. She was going to be a baker for a while. And then I moved on to psychologist, but there are lots and lots and lots of books out there that deal with psychology as their central premise. And I frankly didn't want to do the research to make it good. And so I decided that I would not have her be a psychologist. And a lot of the writers who use psychology as the center of their novels are doing a really good job at that. So then one day I was walking through Harvard Yard. I live near Harvard. I was walking through Harvard Yard, and Widener Library rose up in front of me. For anyone who doesn't know, Widener Library is the largest research library in the world, and it's beautiful. It was built around 1920. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous building. I looked at that and I thought, well, who is someone who's very curious and who knows what to do with data when it comes in? And the answer was a librarian. And so I made Hester a librarian. Her name, that's another sort of long story, and I'll try to be quick with this. So Hester, when I first came up with her, I didn't really know a lot about her. I knew she was a woman. I knew she was 36 years old. And I quickly came up with the fact that she had a kid that she hung out with. And I name characters very quickly, because when you're drafting a novel, you can get caught up on dumb things like naming characters. And then all of a sudden 3 days have gone by and all you've done is hang out on baby naming sites. And so I thought to myself, well, there's this woman with a kid. I'll just name them Hester and Pearl, which is from the Scarlet Letter today. So I named them Hester and Pearl that day. And then the next day I woke up and I thought, this is so pretentious, I have to change it. But I sort of liked the name Hester. So I kept Hester. I wound up renaming the child Kate. And Hester just kind of stuck.
I love it. And when you said you didn't want to go into the psychology angle because you didn't want to do the research, I was very happy to hear that, because I can be a little lazy when it comes to research. If there's two options and one's a little easier and they're both equally effective for the story, I'll always go with the less research one.
Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one. I think actually I'm thinking of a new series, and that one actually may center on psychology. Now that I don't, when I had the full-time job, I had a very big full-time job. When I had the full-time job, I sort of had to pick and choose what I was going to focus on. And so I very deliberately made Hester live where I lived, and I had her go to places where I went very easily, because I didn't have to get out there and research those, because I actually didn't have the time. I couldn't come up with the story and come up with all the research behind things that I didn't know about. Now that I have a little more time, I think I might dive into something with a little more research.
Well, especially if you enjoy the research part of it, which I think a lot of authors do. They like to go to the library and geek out for hours at a time.
Well, I hope I do. I was just doing I'm on the board for Sisters in Crime, and I was just doing a session with a great author named Frankie Bailey, who also is a historian in many ways. And she was doing a session on how to do research, and she was just telling us how she can get lost in research for days and days. And I thought, well, that's never happened to me yet, but maybe it will. I don't know.
Maybe it'll rub off. Well, your first novel, Little Comfort, was critically acclaimed, getting all kinds of recognition, including a Publisher's Weekly starred review, which are, for those listening, is very special. Did this give you a lot of confidence in writing the subsequent books, or did it have the opposite effect where you thought, I have to do something as good or better?
Oh, with reviews, I try not, I'm always not successful with this, but I try my very best not to listen to any of it, because you can get a good review and you can get a bad review, and you can get them in the same day. And I just try to sort of push those aside as much as I can. It's delightful when you get a good review, I'm not going to lie. And it definitely is something that I try to hold dear, but it's also something I try my best not to put too much weight in. And then I wind up failing, but ideally, I try my best not to.
Still, that had to be a good day when you saw the star.
Oh, it sure the heck was. I'm not going to lie. That was a great day.
And it had to make your publisher happy and your agent, and
but you get a starred review from Publishers Weekly, and then on the same day, Sharon on Goodreads says this book is a mess, 1 star.
That's exactly right. And I'm glad you said Sharon instead of Karen, because the Karens of the world have heard enough. So your first 3 books were a series, and your upcoming book, The Secrets We Share, is a standalone novel. Did I get that right?
Exactly. Yep.
Would you mind telling us about the new book, the story, and how you came up with the premise?
Oh my God, much like my first book, this one did not come easily. My first book, the story did not come easily. The second book, the story came actually relatively easily. And the third book, it came super easy. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm learning what I'm doing. And then I started this fourth book and I was like, oh God. So this book is about 2 sisters. They live in West Roxbury, which is a part of Boston. Or one of them lives in West Roxbury and one of them lives in Jamaica Plain. It's the same part of Boston. And they have a dark secret from their childhood that suddenly starts to rear its ugly head when the daughter of one of the women finds a dead body near their house. I really like it. I think it was really fun to write as standalone, because with a series, I'm sure you've heard this before, with a series, like Hester is the main character, but Hester has a longtime partner named Morgan. She has some friends who everyone likes. Like, nothing that bad can ever happen to these people, and they can never do anything terrible. But in a standalone, it's really exciting because anyone can do anything. Anyone can be horrible. Anyone can get killed off. I have a surprise death in the middle of it that I'm really proud of. So it was really fun and really creatively freeing. But I'll tell you a funny story. When I wrote the proposal for this novel for my editor, it was about a prep school in New Hampshire that was run by a couple. It was about the headmaster and his wife. And Then I started writing that novel. I probably wrote about 50,000 words or whatever. It was going absolutely nowhere. So then all of a sudden I switched it. And then it was about a psychologist. It was about a psychologist, who worked on Newbury Street in Boston. And he had 2 sisters and a brother, and the brother had just gotten out of jail. So I wrote to my editor and I was like, no, I'm not doing that first book. Now I'm doing this book. And then the book was due to my editor in April. And in January, I wrote him and I said, I just got rid of the psychologist and the brother in jail. It's now only about 2 sisters. And he was like, well, okay. I don't know what the book's going to be about now. And so then I finally delivered him. I kept wondering to myself, why am I panicked all the time? And it's because in January, when the book was due in April, I had scrapped the entire premise and started it fresh again. So that's the creative process, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. He took the news really well, I have to say.
Oh my God. He did take it very well. I don't know if he did for real, but he certainly was very kind about it in his emails to me. I do always deliver. I do always get my books into the editor. So
do you think he'll ever repurpose something from those previous pages?
I am going to, actually. The problem with the premise, once I came up with the 4 siblings is a lot to choreograph as a writer. And so what I really had to do was figure out who I wanted to stick with for the time. So once I killed off the 2 boys, or not killed off, I got rid of the 2 boys. That helped me focus the story. But I really like the original psychologist. His name is Henry Darling. And so I think my next standalone will be about Henry. But this time he won't have 2 sisters, and he probably won't have a brother either. It'll just be about him.
I love it. I love the nuanced term between killing off and getting rid of. One is in fiction and one is... Okay, so your books are categorized as mysteries, thrillers, suspense, and psychological fiction. How would you describe them?
Oh, I would call them psychological suspense and mysteries. My first one is definitely more of a suspense novel. You know who the killers are from the beginning. It's more of a thriller. The second 2, The Missing Ones and Watch Her, there's more of a mystery element, as in I withhold who the killer is up until the end. But they're definitely suspense novels. They definitely have a very dark side to them. Sometimes people will hear that they have a librarian as the protagonist and think that they're cozy and sweet, but they're actually not. They're pretty dark.
Now you're published by Kensington Books, and we have a lot of aspiring writers as listeners and a lot of avid readers. I think a lot of people love to hear what happens from the time you finish a manuscript until the final book is ready to be shipped to bookstores and libraries.
Oh, sure. I mean, there are lots of steps along the way. I'll try and be brief. The bookmaking process is one with many steps. And part of that is because if you think about it, you hit print, the book is printed, and that's it. So you better have it be right. I mean, it's not like it's an electronic document where you can go back and you can change things if there are mistakes in it. So you finish your manuscript about a year before the book publishes, and you feel good about yourself, and you send it off to your editor. And your editor is a kind person who writes back and says, "Congratulations, I'll get back to you with some notes in a month to 6 weeks." So a month to 6 weeks later, your editor sends back comments and notes and suggestions for revision. I think you probably guessed this. I have a really good relationship with my editor. And so one of the things I really like about working with him is if he gives me a note that I just can't make it work, he's fine with that. But on the flip side, I always try to do what he's suggested to see if it will work or not. So and when we were earlier in our relationship, for my second book, he gave me a note, and I tried for like 2 months to get this thing to work. And finally, it just wasn't working. And I wrote him and I said, I tried and tried and tried, and this didn't work. And he was like, "Oh, okay, that's fine." And I was like, "Oh, okay, good. Well, at least we have a good relationship there." So anyway, so he'll give me notes on the book. I revise it based on those notes. And then I send a revised manuscript to my editor, and he either sends me more notes or he says, "I like this." And so far, it's only been the second thing. Then at that point, the book goes into production, and that it just for this might be interesting to your readers. A book incurs most of its costs once it goes into production. I know this from my own publishing days. Before it goes into productions, the publisher hasn't expended much. Once it goes into production, that's when the investment begins. So it's a big deal for an editor to say, okay, this thing can go into production. So going into production means that for an author, that means that you'll start getting your copy edits, which is a deep edit from someone who looks for consistency throughout the entire book. Make sure that, little things are consistent, like names are consistent throughout the whole thing, but also big things are consistent. Like if you say something happened in January in chapter 2, and all of a sudden it happens in February in chapter 18, your copy editor should catch those things for you. And it's a good copy editor is like your very best friend in the world. So they get your copy edits back, you work on those, and then your editor usually gives you 2 or 3 weeks to work on those. Then you send it back. And now the bookmaking process begins because they start laying it out in pages. The cover design starts coming in, which is always an exciting day. And you get your page proofs back usually a month or 2 after you send in your copy edits. And the page proof stage is really important because that's your absolute very last opportunity to catch those little errors. So you want to go through your pages with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that you're catching anything that you possibly can. Then you send those pages back, and at that point, they'll start making something which is called an ARC, an advanced reader copy. That will have been made actually with the copy edited pages. And those you can start using. You can send those out to people who might review. You can send them out to friends. You can send them out to Bookstagrammers and to Goodreads reviewers and stuff like that to help get the word out on your book. And that usually happens between 3 and 6 months before the book publishes. That's also when the book shows up on like NetGalley and all that kind of stuff, so that you can help. There are all sorts of activities that you can do with people to help get the word out on your book. And then all of a sudden, one day, your book arrives, and it's on Amazon and it's available in bookstores and stuff like that.
Okay, so speaking of which, definitely a long journey. Speaking of which, right after you and I met, because I have had the pleasure of interviewing you in my Facebook group, I swear it was like a week later, I'm in Target, and there's your book. It was so exciting for me to see it, like, oh, I know him. But can you tell us about the first time you saw your actual book in either a bookstore or Target or wherever? Like, what was your reaction?
Oh my gosh, it was just amazing. We have a lot of independent bookstores around the Boston area. I usually do my launches at a bookstore called the Brookline Booksmith. And so that was super exciting to just go in there and see it. That first book, they also had it on like the front, Little Comfort was on the front tables at Barnes and Noble and stuff like that, which was really exciting as well. But I will say there was something about that book in Target that was so exciting. They had done it's called a trade paperback trim size for that book, and it was available in Target. And so it was just kind of fun to go in. It'd be up there on the shelf right next to Stephen King, and it was really, really exciting.
Right next to Stephen King. Doesn't get any better than that.
Well, and Karen's book was right next to Stephen King this week too, in the Amazon store. So you guys both have that in common. Yeah, I have yet to be next to Stephen King, and I doubt it will ever happen.
I don't
given the type of book I write.
Stephen King crosses genres, though, so you never know what he's going to do.
That's true. So what does a writing day look like for you? Are you an outliner or?
It depends on the book. Like, I'm working on my 5th book right now, and that one I outlined, but it was like so crazy the way I outlined, because it was really just like a 2-page outline. And like I knew enough about the book from that 2-page outline that I wrote the whole thing from that outline. Mm. Whereas other books, like my last book, the 4th book that's coming out next year, and clearly that one, I don't know what happened with that one, but nothing, like I had so many false starts with that book. I had so many false starts with that book because I was trying to figure out who the characters were and what the pieces were to that mystery. So, and then like with my 2nd book, that one was really interesting. With The Missing Ones, I was still the editorial director at Macmillan at the time, and I also had a contract. So that was my first book with a contract, and I had a big day job. And so with that one, I had an outline, and I had to stick to the outline because I was under such a time crunch that I just had to work my way through. I had to meet my deadlines, and I had to make those deadlines every day, or I never would have gotten the book turned over. I'll be curious. I'm just finishing up this 5th book right now, and I'm going to take a little bit of a brain break for a while. But I'll be curious I hope with my next book, I'm more organized with it. That would be delightful. But my writing day is I get up, I work from anywhere. I start anywhere between 7 and 8:30 in the morning, and I work until about 12 or 12:30, 12 noon, or 12:30 in the afternoon. And then in the afternoon, I work on other things. Like I do some editorial work. I teach at Emerson College. I do other things in the afternoon.
When you talked about trying to figure out the characters, I have had that exact experience, and I'll say to my husband, I can't figure out what this guy's deal is. He's so hostile or whatever. And it's an odd thing for people that don't write to think, well, you're creating them. How can you not know? But
Yep.
it does come in sort of fits and starts where it takes shape and you get behind what it's all about.
Oh, yeah. Well, and with a novel is such a large piece of writing. And if you pull a thread out of a novel, it can unravel the whole thing. If you change something about a character, it can unravel the entire story. It can unravel the entire motivation of other characters as well. So it's figuring out how all those pieces fit together and how they support each other as you're developing the story.
And it's so satisfying when it does all come together.
Oh my gosh, yes. There's this moment I have with every manuscript, or I've had with every manuscript, where everything all of a sudden falls into place. And that's when I really start getting really excited. It's where you can pull out themes. You can really develop themes in a novel. You can connect things. You can make sure that you're bringing objects back that are important to the story and stuff like that. And once you hit that moment, that's when I suddenly relax and I'm able to really have a lot of fun. It just kind of depends on where that falls based on where my deadline is with my editor.
Now I'm going to change the subject, but only slightly. I want to talk about your writing partner, Edith Ann.
Edith Ann is my yellow lab. She's 5 years old now. And she has been just a delight. I'm sure many people who are listening feel this same way. Like, animals have been such a delight this last year as we've been home and by ourselves a lot of the time. So she just hangs out with me. Once in a while, she'll get into my office. My office is always a disaster, especially when I'm hitting a deadline. And sometimes she'll get in there and she'll just kind of chew on some paper and eat up some of my early drafts. And I always feel delighted that she's done that because it tells me that they really did stink.
Now, I'm going to feel like an old person saying this because I suspect I'm older than either you or Tess, but her name. There was an old TV series called Laugh-In, and Lily Tomlin played a character named Edith Ann in one of the skits.
That's where she comes from. Oh, that's exactly where she comes from. Oh. And I like it now because Edith Ann the dog is 5 years old, and Edith Ann the character, you may remember, was also 5 years old. So I feel like they finally caught up with each other.
Oh, I can't believe that's where the name came from. I thought I'd be the only person who knew that reference.
Yeah, that was good. That was some good sleuthing, Karen. You could be the star of a new Edwin Hill book.
Not quite that clever, but thank you, Tess.
All right. So what about as far as craft goes? What is the easiest part of it for you, the writing process, and what's the most difficult?
Oh my goodness. I know what the most difficult part is, and this is like broad, but for me, writing the first draft is really, really hard. And figuring out where I'm going to go every day for the 80 or so, it takes me about 80 work days to write a first draft. And part of that is just sitting down and forcing yourself to write things. And sometimes they're really terrible. And sometimes you write yourself into a hole. And just kind of sticking with the whole process and really believing in myself, which I often don't do during that process, is very, very hard. The part that I think that I'm best at is the puzzle part, and this comes later on in the development of a mystery novel. You want a mystery novel to fit together like a jigsaw puzzle, obviously. And one of the things I really like to do is figuring out what stays and what goes. I always write too much material, much like I did with this last novel. There were 4 kids. We didn't need 4 kids. I cut them down to 2. And what I really love is that point where you're starting to go through a manuscript and you're saying, you're staying, you're staying, you're going, this plot point's going, this point's going, these plot points are all staying, and we're making them much larger. And that's the part where I really start getting excited and start really feeling like I actually know what I'm doing. Because boy, during that first draft, I often don't know what I'm doing, or don't feel like I know what I'm doing.
Is there some kind of advice that you wish someone had given you when you were starting out, writing advice you'd have for beginners?
Oh, I mean, I would just say 2 things. I would say find a job that you really like. It takes a while to become a writer, and you want to have a career that supports that passion that you have. So find a job that you actually like doing. Don't find a job that is, sort of this terrible thing that you do on the side to support that writing. So I've always been so grateful for the publishing career that I had. And the wonderful people that I worked there, and the many, many, many years that I spent working there. And that was an equal passion to writing while I was doing both of them. So that would be number one. And the other is just resilience. Like, stick with it. Writing is a skill like anything. You get better at it as you go along. And if you keep doing it every day, or as many days as you possibly can per week, you'll get somewhere.
Is there a writing book that you recommend to aspiring authors, a craft book that really meant a lot to you as you were learning?
I really like a book called Blot Perfect by Paula Meunier, which is published by Writer's Digest Books. It's just a really good nuts and bolts approach to writing and plotting. I think plotting is really a good thing to understand the basics of. I'm not like some people get really into structure, and they're called structure geeks. I like to know the elements of plot and some of the things that you should think about, some of the big building blocks of plot that you should know about. And this book is really good at that. Another essay I really like is by Anne Lamott. It's called Shitty First Drafts, and I return to it all the time. I use it with my students all the time as well. And it just reminds you that everyone's first draft, if you're writing a short story, if you're writing a little essay, if you're writing a blog post, it doesn't matter. Everyone's first draft, or if you're writing a long form novel, everyone's first draft is terrible. And if you can remember that on the bad days, it'll help you get to the good days.
Now, as you're writing, do you have an ideal reader in mind? Is there someone that you think of being on the other end of the book? Stephen King says he writes for his wife.
Oh, I guess I write for someone who I write for someone. I mean, all of my books are about people overcoming decisions that they made at another time in their life. That's a theme that has come back in all of my novels. But they're also like literary novels. So I think that they're literary mysteries. And so I think my ideal reader is someone who likes to read literary novels, but also likes to read in genre fiction, and maybe does it on the sly.
You give them a little of both, or a lot of both.
Yep.
I love that. That's great. You've touched on this quite a few times already, but you do obviously have doubts about a book as you're going along in the middle and all that. But what about when it's finally done and you get that note from your editor, okay, we're sending it to production? Do you ever have a quiver of doubt at that point, or is it gone by then?
Oh, no, I'm too pragmatic for that. And I'll also tell you that if you're doing your job right as a writer, by the time a novel actually publishes, by the time it goes to the printer, you're so into your next novel that you almost can't even remember the one that's being printed. You're so ingrained in the one that you're working on currently. And so eventually you have to give yourself over to the fact that things are going to be printed. There are sometimes actually typos in manuscripts, and that's life. You fix them in reprints. And maybe you make a decision with a character that you think, oh gosh, maybe I would have made a different decision with that. Well, you can make that decision with another character later on. There's this quote, and I wish I knew who to attribute it to, but I don't. I think it might be Teddy Roosevelt, but I don't know. I love this quote. It's, if you make a bad decision, make another one. because you can always get yourself out of a bad decision. And that's the same thing with writing. If you make a bad decision with a character or with a plot, make another decision and make it with your next book.
That's reassuring words. I could have used that halfway through my last manuscript. We've interviewed quite a few authors who they've used various words to describe that they thought their manuscripts were rubbish, trash, terrible, unreadable, and then it always turns out fine. But it's almost like you have to go through a little bit of that to get to the end and feel like you've created something that's worthy of readers.
Oh, absolutely. This manuscript that is coming out next year, the Secrets We Share, I actually thought that one I handed over in April, and I actually thought it was trash up until probably mid to late March. I mean, it was a slog. And then all of a sudden, it's shocking. All of a sudden it came together.
Oh, I'm so glad we're having this talk.
Exactly.
For you, what is the best part of the job of being an author?
Oh, I mean, I love the creative process. I mean, I just love the fact that I get to create these worlds and create these characters. I mean, it's something that I've always dreamed of doing. And what a privilege to be able to do it. I mean, I just love the fact that that's my favorite part, the fact that I get to do it.
Who has been your biggest supporter as you built your craft and career?
Oh gosh, there have been so many people. For anyone who writes in crime fiction, I'm sure you've heard, or you probably already know this, but for people who don't write in crime fiction, it's a very, very supportive community, especially when you're new on the scene. People are very welcoming, and they really want to lift people up as they come through and really help them. I always say publishing is like there's these series of portals that you have to get through, and so for traditional publishing, you have to finish your manuscript, you have to find your agent, you have to find your editor, and you have to find your audience. And what I really love about the crime writing community is that successful authors are so willing to reach down and help people come through those portals. A couple of people that have been very, very helpful to me, I would mention first would be Sean Riley Simmons. She writes a series called the Red Carpet Catering series. And she also is one of the people who runs Malice Domestic, which is a mystery writers convention in Bethesda, Maryland. I went to a conference, it's called BoucherCon, I think it would have been 2017 in Toronto, and I was super nervous. I'm terrible at going to conferences by myself. I was super nervous. I spent like 3 days. I spent 3 days like not talking to anyone, and feeling like a loser. Like you do when you don't know anyone. And all of a sudden, Sean Riley Simmons, we met at this event. All of a sudden, I had someone to talk to, and it was one of those things that was like transformative. She introduced me to all sorts of people. She was so open with introducing me to a bunch of other people. Another person I would like to mention would be Hank Philippi Ryan. She's based here in the Boston area. She's just very, very generous with her time with authors around everywhere. And she's been very generous with her time with me. Hallie Efron was very generous with me as well, who's also a Boston-based author. But there are so many people who have been helpful and just kind and said, you can do this.
That's wonderful. Delia Efron gave me a blurb for one of my earlier books, and I impressed a lot of librarians who were like, how did you do that? I said, we just asked. She was so kind. Mm-hmm. And it really does lift you up. I think those were the words you used. And that brings us to the next question, which is when you first start out and you don't know anyone or anything, what keeps you from being discouraged? Is it making connections or, yeah?
I would do two things when you're first starting out is one, look for conferences that are local where you can meet people. I mean, now hopefully we'll be getting out more and seeing people in person more, but look for conferences that are local where you can meet other local people who are doing what you're doing. Again, like in crime fiction, at least, people are very generous with their time. And so, for example, here in Boston, we have a conference called the Crime Bake. That happens every year. And that's a great place to go and meet local authors who are either in the same boat as you, trying to get published, or are local and can help lift you up and help you become a published person. I'd also look for professional organizations. In crime, there's Mystery Writers of America, MWA. There's also Thriller Fest. And then there's also Sisters in Crime, which I'm actually on the board of Sisters in Crime. And so those are 3 great ways to connect with other authors and just be honest with people. This is where I failed. I was like, I always wanted to be like taken seriously. I wanted to be like I couldn't go and say, I need help. And so like for people who want help, like just show up and say, I need help. What do I do now? And like someone's going to take your hand and help guide you through.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Writers have proven over the years, to me anyway, to be extremely generous with their time and advice about the business side of things and all that. All right. So what is the why when it comes to your fiction? What are you hoping readers will take from your books?
I mean, I hope the why I think is I hope that they'll be moved by the journey of the characters and feel like they experienced something on an emotional level as they went through this story, whatever the story is that they're reading at the time. With the series, it's a little different. I like to, so I have 3 books in the series, and I hope to have 3 new books later on. I want them to take a journey through that series and really see the emotional growth of Hester, and the central characters are Hester and her partner Morgan. I want readers to see the emotional journey of those characters through the series. With a standalone novel like the one that I just wrote, I want them to feel like they have gone through a journey that sort of has a beginning and an end because it is a standalone, but that it was worth sitting with for the time that they sat with those characters. I also want them to be surprised. I think one of the fun things about writing a mystery is that there's a surprise and that you both saw it coming and didn't see it coming at the same time. And so at the end of a novel, I want every reader to say, that was the only way that could have ended, but I was still surprised by it.
So can you tell us what you're working on right now, or is that something you're keeping under wraps?
Oh, no. I mean, I'm working on a new standalone, and it's very different. It's much more literary than my first 4 novels. It's about a group of students who are in an improv group in college, and then it follows them for 40 years. And it sort of deals with creativity and how different individuals deal with creativity during their adult lives. So there are 5 students in the improv group, and they all have different experiences through their lives. One of them becomes a very famous sitcom star. She's the only one who sort of takes the comedy route. And then each of them has different relationships with creativity and with comedy as they age through their lives. It's about the relationship with our creative sides. But there's also murder in it. Don't worry.
I was going to
That sounds really good, though. I would like to. That sounds like right
up your alley, Tess.
Yeah, or up or down, whatever the saying is. Yeah.
Well, we always wrap up our podcast with 10 fun extra questions that are not writing related. And we kind of ask sort of rapid fire. So are you up for this?
Oh, sure, of course.
Okay, the very first one is, what is one food that will never get past your lips?
Oh, mayonnaise.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Well, I think I would want Hugh Grant to play me. Well, a young Hugh Grant to play me. So I'll just, a lot of people say I look like Steve Carell. So one of those 2 people.
I could see that a little bit. Yeah. What superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
Breathing underwater. Aquaman.
At the end of your life, what do you hope you'll have accomplished?
At the end of my life, I hope that I will, actually, I'll be really selfish on this one. I hope that one of my books is turned into a TV series.
I love that answer. Everyone else is so
No. Like, I knew I was tempted to go in that direction. And then I thought, you know what? I'm just going to be totally upfront with this one, straight up with this one.
Get an A+ for that answer. What is the worst job you've ever had?
Oh my God. When I lived in California for the first 2 years, I was a temp for 2 years, and I couldn't even pick. There were so many, like you were such a low nothing when you're a temp. And I was the lowest of the low, but I would probably say, I mean, I could go on and on about this, but I worked for this one company where I was the receptionist, and it was owned by this woman who was about probably 179 years old. And she would come into, and there were these vice presidents who worked in the office, and they were like regular old vice presidents, like mean, grumpy vice presidents. But when the owner of the company showed up, she would show up in a fur coat in California, this enormous fur coat. She was as tiny as can be, with this gigantic poodle named Cookie, and As soon as she walked through the door, and Cookie didn't know any commands, and Cookie would go running around the office, and these vice presidents who were like normal, mean business vice presidents would suddenly be reduced to just chasing Cookie around the office. Cookie, 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 until she finally left.
Oh my God, that is awesome.
It was probably terrible at the time, but it makes a great story now.
Oh God, no! I tell you, I've gotten more stories out of those 2 years of temping. They were terrible, but I have gotten a lot of good stories out of them.
Okay, the next question: if you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
Oh, I think right now it would be psychology, because I'm going to start this book about a psychologist.
What's your favorite scent?
Oh, probably vanilla.
What is the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
Well, I don't like heights at all, and at all. And so I hiked this thing in the UK. There's this hike called the oh my God, I can't remember it, but it's this like razor sharp pass that goes for about maybe a quarter of a mile. And so you walk for a quarter of a mile on top of this mountain, and with the mountain sort of falling on each side of you, so you could basically plummet to your death the entire time. So that was pretty scary.
When people pronounce words incorrectly, do you let them know?
No.
Never ever?
Nope. Never ever.
If you could live your life over again, would you want to?
Oh, sure. I mean, sure. Like parts of it. Like, doesn't everyone want to undo all of the mistakes they've ever made?
Well, that's true.
Yeah. And who wouldn't want to just be able to do it all over again? But I'm relatively happy. But sure, I'd love to be able to undo my mistakes.
Well, this has been so much fun talking to you. Thank you for agreeing to give us your time and listen to our questions.
Oh, this was amazing. Karen, Tess, thank you so much.
Well, we loved having you, and I hope you'll come back when your next book comes out. And I am very excited for this one about the improv, because my background is in acting.
I haven't sold that one to anyone yet, so we will see if it goes anywhere. Yes.
We should probably mention before we sign off, The Secrets We Share comes out when?
It comes out in April, at the very beginning of April.
Okay. We'll watch for it.
Okay. Yeah, we will. Thank you, Edwin. We love having you, and good luck with your next release.
Thank you, and thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. See ya.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and post a question in the comment section. This has been Behind the Book.